Hey, this is LOA Today, the Law of Attraction show. Welcome to LOA Today. My name is Walt Thiessen. Today is Tuesday, February 26, 2013. And with me today is John McGinnis. He's the author of Psychic Readings with the Thinkers of Heaven. Interesting title. He's going to be talking to us about a number of things, about, among other things, how he and his wife Martha have managed to create a psychic connection into the afterlife, and how he's had interviews, conversations, if you will, with people like Abraham Lincoln and Albert Einstein and many more. And well, without any further ado, I'm going to introduce him because I'm really curious to know how he does this. So, John McGinnis, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Walt. Good to speak with you.
Okay, conversations with the beyond. I mean, there are going to be some people who are skeptical. Some people are going to say, yeah, right. But some people are going to say, yeah, let's do it. First of all, how on earth do you connect? I mean, I've never been able to complete a person-to-person phone call to Abraham Lincoln, so I'd like to know how it's done.
Well, Walt, nobody was more surprised or skeptical about these readings than myself and my wife. We rather stumbled on this technique by reading a book by a psychic medium named John Edward that I think you know
Sure,
of already.
On TV.
And he described a procedure which we thought would not likely work, but we were curious about it and tried it out. We modified his procedure to include both of us. My wife Martha is the receiver of the information. She's the open channel. I'm the person who asks the questions that I don't disclose to her in advance, but I bounce the questions off her in rapid fire, 40 or 50 of them in an hour, much like a legal deposition. We just ask all the hard questions we can think of, and then she instantaneously produces these answers. What Edward described and we used was a system of meditation that puts you in a relaxed meditative state. Then you rise up through what he calls a chakra elevator, different stages of concentration, and finally my wife goes into what she describes as a meditation chamber, and at that point her spirit guides appear to her and put her in touch with the people that we intend to talk to. We started out, Walt, with just our family members. As you can understand, that's the most pressing thing on your mind. How is your mother doing? How is your father doing? How is your grandfather doing? And we had these wonderful conversations that went for up to an hour with our own family members, and it was the most joyous experience I've ever had, talking about minutia from my childhood 50 or 60 years ago with them and seeing what they were up to. And then, just as an experiment, we tried to reach out to people that weren't family members. We reached out to former colleagues and friends who'd passed on, and it worked again quite fine. So it wasn't just a family connection. Then we tried complete strangers to see if we could make the linkage there. And again, we're delighted that we made the connection. And we started with Albert Einstein, moved through Gandhi, Churchill, Galileo, Lincoln, Shakespeare, a number of eminent people. And the reason we picked these subjects is that we wanted to write, to speak with people who had left a biographical record where there's some scholarship that we could use to compare, what was said to us in these readings with history. And I thought that was very helpful because the speakers were able to fill in gaps in the biography and explain some of their works and some of their writings in a fascinating way. And once we realized there was an afterlife, and these speakers referred to God and heaven and their activities in heaven, we immediately decided we have to learn more about heaven. What's it like? What activities do people pursue? Who gets into heaven? What is God like? What is God's plan for our planet? Is there such a thing as hell or a devil? And so we took up all the big questions with them. And we've written up these interviews in 30 or 40 of them in this volume, and we recite the procedure that others can use. That's the real reason in publishing these readings, is to encourage other people to strike up conversations with their own family members and then others that may interest them. So that's the background, Walt, for the book.
So it sounds like you kind of do something similar to what Jerry and Esther Hicks do through their spirit guide they call Abraham, where sort of Martha plays Esther's role and she kind of channels what is coming through from the other side. Does that sound like a parallel that's fair?
Yes, it is, and I had no conception there was such a thing as a spirit guide, and I found out that all of us have a number of them, and I'm helped by 3 people. My wife is helped by 8 guides right now. Over a lifetime, you may have up to 100 guides who take turns working with you on different issues.
Wow, that gets crowded.
They take turns. If you're working on art, there will be people interested in art. If you're working on communications, there are people that do that. If you're working on laws, I used to do. Legal experts will advise you if you turn to them.
You've actually gotten legal advice.
Well, yes, I mean they will assist you if you're stumped on a legal problem and you ask for help. You actually do get help. I'm now retired, and I didn't do this while I was a practicing lawyer, but as I work on scholarly projects, you do get help of that kind. My wife has a guide who is an Indian shaman, and I think that is very important to this process because his life on Earth involved transporting himself back and forth between heaven and earth and bringing information in. And he actually assists us to get in touch with some of the more elusive personalities that we've tried to reach. For example, we reached out to C.S. Lewis, the spiritual writer, and he was very, very busy and preoccupied, didn't recognize us at all. But my wife's spirit guide, the Indian shaman, was able to persuade him to have a conversation with us. Some of these conversations are easier to negotiate than others. Most are quite willing to talk, but others are heavily preoccupied with their own jobs and activities in heaven. And we were fascinated to find out all the different things people do in heaven. It isn't just a matter of sitting on clouds and playing a harp. Not at all. I mean, some are travelers that go throughout the cosmos to bring God's information to people in more primitive conditions. Some work on matters like science here, philosophy, theology. Some are artists that still pursue drama or painting. And in these readings, all of these different activities are described. I don't think we talked to 2 people who are doing the same activity in heaven, which I think is something to look forward to for all of us. There are many, many functions for us in the next life.
Yeah. When my father passed in March of 2008, my sister, who has some minor psychic ability, got a quick connection from him within a few days after it. And during that connection, she asked him, what's it like on the other side? He had one word that came back. His word was festive. Does that word festive, does that match up with what you've picked up from your connections?
Absolutely. These folks are in a joyous state. We found, however, that some of them felt a little bit isolated and a little bit scarred by the experience on Earth. Galileo, for example, is somewhat sequestered, and as you know, he had a tough life on Earth, and he's thinking about the lessons of that life. But for the most part, they are joyous. There is an element of bittersweetness in some of these conversations. And your title, Law of Attraction, I think well describes the connection that you can make. It's easiest to link up with family members. You know, they're fascinated with your life. They want to be involved with your life. We're on different sides of a veil, but we're like magnets that attract to each other. And it's the familial love that makes this so easy. And that's where people should start, because their kinship group or family really wants to be in touch with them. And I found my own mother was pursuing medical research and helping people on Earth, and that's what she always wanted to do in this world. She was a part-time scientist, but didn't have a chance to do that as extensively as she wanted to, so now she's doing it. And if you reach out to your own family, you're going to be well rewarded, I believe.
Since apparently it's your wife who actually makes the connection and you simply talk with the connection, this may be a hard question for you to answer, but what's it like when she actually makes the connection? How does that experience feel, and how do you experience the experience, so to speak?
Well, you know, that's a great question, because I cannot hear a bit of this. I cannot hear it. I'm not a psychic. I'm the guy who records what comes through. I'm the guy who does the research and writes out the question. My wife is a psychic medium, and what happens is she immediately makes connection through her guide. It takes just a minute to go through the meditation, and often she gets an image. If the folks on the other side want to convey an image, they will. There will be a recognizable, face and body that comes through. For example, well, Winston Churchill was immediately recognizable. Jesus was immediately recognizable. And so she gets the visual accompaniment, and also they send symbols throughout the discussion to illustrate what they're talking about. She gets visions of their environment, their activities, and so forth. My questions have to be pretty simple. I keep them down to 3 or 4 sentences because she converts them to a thought ball of her own and sends them, and what she gets back in a flash without a minute of musing is a whole block of thought. It's several paragraphs that come through, and she talks very, very quickly. And I have to jot this down and record it, which I try to faithfully do.
So it actually comes through as text, as sentences.
It does, and I because we speak with people from other centuries and other languages, I ask, how is this possible? We're speaking in English, and we're getting English back. And how does that work with people from other cultures? And the answer we got is that this is the thought that pours through all language that gets conveyed this way. So if we talk to an Englishman like Churchill, you get a lot of his rhetoric from the 30s and 40s. It's very recognizable that he's an Englishman and not an American. But if you talk to Galileo, who spoke Italian, it's more homogenized, and it's understandable English, but it isn't quite accented the way the Englishman would speak.
So it's kind of like what Google Translate tries to do, only to the nth degree.
Yes, but the amazing thing, Walt, is that it is really clear and it is really logical, and it's filled with wonderful imagery. Much of this stuff is very poetic, and the most poetic people of all are the spiritual speakers. St. Francis, Jesus. We were able to speak with the mind of God. We never dreamt of doing this, but we were told we could, so we tried it, and God is very, very eloquent. And, of course, the eloquent speakers like Shakespeare and Alexander Pope and the other literary people still are extremely eloquent. So these readings are enjoyable, I think, regardless of what you think of the procedure that we use. They're just fascinating little essays and viewpoints on all the philosophical issues that we ask. And I tried, Walt, on some friends, a judge and a physician and a scientist. Let's do this experiment. If you're skeptical about this, I'm going to ask you these 50 questions in an hour, and you have no advance word about the questions. Let's see how you can answer these. And I try to ask very difficult, almost unanswerable questions. And they couldn't come up with anything, just using imagination. But what comes through these psychic readings is eloquent and wonderful and full of philosophy and spiritual teaching. So that to me is quite an indication of the authenticity of the information we're getting.
Yeah, that actually ties into my next question. I guess you partially answered it, but I'm sure you went into this with your own skepticism and doubt. What actually turned the tide for you where your own skepticism was concerned?
Well, my skepticism was enormous. I wasn't raised in any particular religious denomination. I had no religious training. I'm an ordinary, rather secular guy, to tell you the truth. And I never dreamt this would work. We just did it out of curiosity because we had thumbed through this book. What turned the tide for me was the very first interview, when you talk to your own mother for an hour, and she's describing events from 60 or more years ago that my wife never knew about, and then talking back and forth about family events. It's just would be impossible for my wife to make this up. And on one occasion, on my 65th birthday, we had a family reunion where aunts and uncles attended, grandparents and so forth, and they were popping in and out, talking about their own their own personal activities in heaven and also about events on earth. And it would be literally impossible for anybody to make this up. The other thing that really convinced me, we did a reading with Richard Feynman, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist, and my wife has never read a page of physics, and she's never heard of Feynman. And I asked her the toughest questions on nuclear physics, particle physics, cosmology. I spent 2 weeks reading about Feynman, and she answered every question perfectly in very detailed scientific language. How is that possible? It really isn't. unless it's a genuine connection. And we did the same thing with Shakespeare. I asked about all the unresolved questions in his biography. Who were your sonnets addressed to? Who were your coworkers? Did Francis Bacon help you write these plays? Et cetera, et cetera. And he filled all the blanks in the biography. So after doing 20 or 30 of these, and each of the speakers conveying different information, different language inflection, and the questions being totally unknown to my wife in advance, I was thoroughly persuaded that these are authentic connections.
Have you? I'm trying to think what the right way is to ask this question, but have you ever looked at this from the point of view of? Well, let's take this a different way. Have you recorded any of these?
Yes, we have recorded some of them. I did them shorthand. And it's an ongoing process. I intend to record more of them. We have a second volume of these readings coming out this summer.
Okay.
And another most important authenticator, in my view, is can other people do it? If it's just a fluke with me and my wife, it doesn't have a lot of empirical importance. But if dozens of people can do it, and we are told that several thousand people in the world today can do this, then there is a critical mass, I think, of information for scientists to look at. And we tried this with a few family members and found that they indeed could do the same thing. And I'm hoping that readers of this book will conduct the same experiment.
Now, this book was released when?
It was released last summer on Amazon. It's also Barnes & Noble, and the title is Psychic Readings with the Thinkers of Heaven by John and Martha McGinnis. And readers that are curious about it can browse the first few pages for free and see what they think of it, and then download it if they're interested.
And I would imagine in that time you might have gotten some response from readers saying they were able or were not able to do the same thing.
Well, it's interesting. I haven't received communications like that yet outside of our own family, but I did get communications from Kirkus Review thought that the book was plausible and interesting, and I spoke with a gentleman who was at Esalen Institute in California who found the readings to be fascinating, and his view was you couldn't get this kind of information if it wasn't authentic. But we haven't yet conducted the big experiment, of having people around the world attempt the same kind of reading and report how it's succeeding outside of our own family. But I'm anxious to take that step.
Well, that kind of ties into the question I was stumbling on before, and I decided to lay out the groundwork with what's been recorded so far as the way of leading into it. But now that you have some stuff that's been recorded, have you thought of trying to do similar recordings with some of these other people in your family, since at this point your reach in terms of number of people who successfully try this is limited to your family? Have you thought of trying to do the same kinds of things with similar members in your family and see if they get the similar kinds of responses? In other words, compare recorded responses.
Well, yes, we have done this with family members. My wife has a sister who does this with her own family member. I have a daughter who has succeeded, but these have been limited just to members of our family, ancestors. They haven't tried to reach out to historical figures yet. You'll see there's one interesting interview by Lao Tzu, the Chinese philosopher, who makes the point that it does take a little preparation to carry this very far. You do have to meditate over time. You do have to learn to listen and proceed with some humility. This is not just a parlor trick. And we try to lay out the advice that the guides gave us for others that want to do this. And I can't say it's all just overnight. You turn on a switch and suddenly you're a psychic medium. They do make the point that there are people that have more talent and less talent. So, not everybody can do this, and we don't want to mislead about that. But our hope is that around the world there'll be thousands of people, as we were told, who can do the same thing. And we're extending that invitation with this first book, and then we're going to have two more after that.
Now, Martha was the one who was able to successfully make the connection, and you indicated earlier you're not psychic at all. Does that mean you tried it and you weren't able to get anywhere with it?
Exactly. We changed roles. She was the questioner, and I was the receiver, and I got a complete blank. We asked about this. How is this possible that we're both equally interested in the subject now? How come only one can do it? The answer we got is that some people are receivers and others are senders. I used to be a lawyer, and my job was to communicate and to talk and to synthesize ideas and make arguments and presentations. That makes me a sender in their view, whereas my wife was somebody given to meditation and prayer and study, and somebody who could naturally walk into a room and pick up on conversations and feelings in the room, and so that made her a receiver. It's just a different set of gifts, they keep saying, and that we shouldn't lament over those differences. We were told, though, Walt, that there's a big virtue in putting two minds together. The work that's been done in this area so far has been one mind, some psychic meeting somebody and introducing that person to an ancestor in the afterlife. There hasn't been this focused effort to put two minds together, one studiously researching, making connection in advance with the subjects by doing research, and then the other opening the mind completely using the meditative technique and bringing back the answers. And I think there's tremendous merit in this two minds approach. But that's the thing that I would stress for those that want to try it. It does take some meditation. We prayed for divine wisdom before we did this, and we took it seriously, and it worked the first time for us. But I'm told that others may require some practice.
Now, here's a really intriguing one, and I suspect I know what the answer is. I suspect you haven't tried this, but I want to throw it out there because it just occurs to me this could be really fascinating. You and your wife are successfully able to make this connection. And I'm thinking of somebody like Jerry Nestor Hicks or somebody else out there, some other pair who have managed to do the same kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't it be interesting to make an earthly agreement that, say, you and your wife and some other pair who have successfully done this will try to do this kind of connection at the same temporal time? In other words, that let's say my wife and I, let's assume for the sake of discussion, we were able to do this. So you and Martha and Louise and I would simultaneously in our separate locations agree to do this, and we would both record it, and we would do this with the goal of trying to communicate to each other through our spirit guides. So in other words, like having a conversation with my group and your group at the same time through our connection to the other side, and see if we can record that conversation simultaneously. That to me sounds like it would be fascinating to do.
That experiment has been done with mediums with success. There's a book about this by Professor Schwartz at the University of Arizona, and if I have the name right, and he used George Anderson as a medium, and he used one other well-known medium, I think von Prague, and they reached out to the same people in different locations and had conversations back and forth. They were recorded and compared, and they were closely similar to each other. So I think that sort of thing is possible.
AT&T wouldn't like it very well.
But what we've been trying to do, rather than just exhaust all the experiments that you could do to confirm for skeptics that this works, is to share the data so others will try it while we move ahead. Our main interest in this has been, not the parlor trick, but frankly, to get as much divine wisdom as we can through this method.
Sure, yeah.
And I was fascinated by, what is heaven like? I mean, I'd assumed it was this sort of vacuous state with ghosts floating about. That's the idea you get from a lot of these psychics, that it's just a ghostly voice appearing with some faded comment on I'll remember the family forever, which is kind of consoling, but you don't learn what heaven is like. So I really wanted to know what it was like. What are the different levels like? What are the different activities?
There are levels to heaven.
Yeah, and what are the activities people pursue? How free are you in this environment to pursue one activity or another? Is there such a thing as God? And if so, what is God like? We've been taught that God is this sort of punitive figure who threatens sinners with damnation if they go astray.
Yeah, I never really bought that one.
And it's totally untrue. It's been this defamation aimed at our Creator for centuries. It's utterly false. God judges no one. He punishes no one. He condemns no one. And the first thing God said to us is, you need to understand, I'm both a father and a mother, and the mother's all-inclusive and all-forgiving love is the essence of my nature. And you should tell people that. That what they're being taught about sinners in the hands of an angry God is just false. And there is no such place as hell. People can go off on a false track. They can put themselves off the path of truth, but they all come back. Some will reincarnate to work off their debts, the misdeeds that they've done, and to learn additional lessons. And people ask us, well, gee, if there's no hell, that's not just, or the great villains of history go scot-free. The answer is you don't know the end of the story, because of all of the supposed victims of these villains, the victims of World War II, and you name the crisis, they've all returned to heaven unscathed, and they've learned lessons, and they've done good deeds that help in their spiritual progress. So they're all exalted. The more you suffer, the higher you go. And this earthly experience is just designed to teach golden lessons. That's the phrase they use. It's a stage where you act out, you triumph over your demons, you do the courageous thing, you do the right thing, and you learn spiritual wisdom. God made the point in our conversation with him, her, that you shouldn't fear suffering, you shouldn't fear death. None of this can hurt you. Your soul is immortal. You're returning home sooner or later with spiritual maturity enhanced. So this is all a process of refinement, and heaven should be looked at as an enhanced kind of consciousness, not so much a change in place, but your mind is elevated by the earth experience. So we looked into that. We looked into Jesus.
What about for people who are disappointed that there isn't a hell? They were hoping that Hitler would burn forever.
Yeah, no. We spoke with Virginia Woolf, who's had an uncle named James Fitzjames Stephen. He gave up his belief in God, but he could never shake his belief in eternal damnation, she said. People are disappointed and I asked the question directly, what happens to a Hitler or a Stalin or a Napoleon who cost so many lives on Earth? And they some of them look around and they take 5 or 6 minutes and they say, we never see those people here. What happens to them? I don't know. But,
really? That's a different answer. I've never heard that one before.
It's a different answer, and the explanation I get when I press, because I'm very curious about, the scope of justice, is that we don't see them here because they reincarnate again and again, and they have to work off all the hard edges and pay off their debts. We spoke with Marcus Aurelius.
So there's a karmic side going on.
A little bit, but nobody is punished with endless rounds of dismal incarnations. We asked how often do people reincarnate? Is it hundreds and hundreds of times? And they say no. It may be 10 or 12 times in all of eternity, and people learn lessons. Most of the people we spoke with said, I don't want to reincarnate. I'm quite happy here. I'm not going back unless, there's a very good reason. One interesting exception was Churchill, who said, I'm sitting on the edge of my seat watching what's going on in the world, in the Middle East, where I carved up this territory, made these new nations. We're very concerned that our good may be eroded here, and I'm thinking of reincarnating at a future point where I might be of some use. And we asked him about, the vistas of heaven, and he said, I don't want to talk about that. I'm fascinated by what's going on Earth. And that surprised me.
That's like a grass is greener on the other side story.
A little bit. Yeah, I think they view Earth as kind of exhausting and shocking and stressful, but as a chance to really make a contribution. They come down to Earth to do some good, to love the unlovable, to help the unhelpable, and to assist in progress. And one of God's key purposes is that the world progress and that people advance spiritually. And some of the very best do come back to Earth to spark that progress. So some have an interest in reincarnating. Some actually love the concrete experience of the Earth. The water, the sunrise, the natural beauty. We talked to a man who was 40,000 years old, who was an early settler in the United States, and he said, I can't get enough of the Earth experience. There's not much nature left, but I come back again and again, and I'm a lumberjack. I live in the woods. I can't get enough of it. But most of them said, we're quite happy where we are, and there's good reason to be happy where they are, because their minds are accelerated. They're much smarter than we are. They instantly download not only our whole lives, but our whole kinship group, what we're reading. They know in advance the questions we're going to ask. While I'm researching them, they're researching they're researching us. and clearly their minds are much faster. They give these brilliant answers instantaneously. They know everything going on the earth and then everything going on in heaven and the rest of the creation. Some of them travel throughout the cosmos. And so it's truly, an improved situation. And because of that, you learn you shouldn't mourn people who pass away, family members or friends. They're better off than you are, which was very consoling. And we also asked, is it necessary to believe X, Y, or Z, to get into heaven? Is there any admission pass? And the answer is no. Everybody's accepted with open arms. A few reincarnate, but most are accepted and spend, vast amounts of time in heaven, which is the true home. And I said, what about the atheist who doesn't believe in God and doesn't believe in heaven? And the answer is they're received with open arms. They're instantly grateful when they arrive to see that heaven includes everybody and everybody has wonderful activities to pursue. And it doesn't matter in the slightest if they had no belief in the deity or in the afterlife.
I have to admit, there's a piece of me that is very glad that the Christians, the Hindus, the Muslims, the Buddhists, all the ones who claim that you had to have some sort of reception of grace from them in order to get in, they were all wrong. It's nice to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all won the spiritual lottery. You don't have to believe.
Which will actually annoy a lot of our listeners, I'm sure, because a lot of listeners are religious. I mean, it's true. And in fact, the whole concept of law of attraction, which of course is the basis of our show, is found in most of the major religions of the world, at least to one degree or another. So that's why we tend to get listeners like that. So this will be perhaps at the very least challenging to many listeners, but nevertheless, for me, I feel very comforted by the fact that the religions really don't deserve to have as much sway over us as they have.
Well, I talked to the deity about this very question. I said, what's your view of organized religion in the world today? And the answer was that, I love all of these churches. They all have advantages. They all have benefits, but they all have misconceptions. And what God wants to do now, he and she report, is to move to a more personalized sense of the deity, one-on-one connection with God. I'm told we are all individual expressions of the mind of God. We're not just little creations made up like art objects out of dust or something like that. We don't know our true spiritual status. We're not creatures of flesh and blood. We're perfect spiritual entities, God says. And I asked, are you ever disappointed with your creatures? And he said, never, 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 never. I see you as perfect images and reflections of me, perfect expressions of my mind. And your individual expressions, that means everybody's different. Everybody's going to have a different path and a different activity in the world. But together, this makes up the body of God. When Jesus said the Father and I are one, that's the key teaching of Christianity, the unity between the creation and the Creator. And God is trying right now to bring down the veil between heaven and earth. I asked, this veil, we're told in Exodus that we can't communicate with heaven. Where does this veil come from? And he said, it's entirely man-made. God didn't create a veil, and I didn't intend the separation. The new heaven and new earth means that the earth and heaven are going to unite. And God is in the process of building bridges right now between heaven and earth. And heaven receives these communications with great joy. Contrary to the idea that spiritual contact is some sort of sin. It's considered an advanced spiritual state, and others are encouraged to do the very same thing. And the advantage of this from heaven's perspective is there's this huge fund of wisdom on the other side. There are people with sharper intelligence than we have that are working on all the same issues that we're working on, including art, law, philosophy, spiritual development, exploration of the cosmos, physics. Richard Feynman said he wants to work directly with the scientists on Earth. He said, give this a try. Give me a call. We want to work with you in your current activities. So there's this huge fund of wisdom.
I really want to learn this.
Yeah. Well, listen. Walt, there's no question you have spiritual guides, and it's just a matter of using the procedures as best you can and meditating and studying this to make better connection. I can't hear them, but I get subliminal information from them. If I whisper the answer into my ear, I get the answer inside my head. It doesn't come in words, but it comes in intuition. And you've had that experience 1,000 times yourself. Sure. That you're stumped with a problem, you sleep on it, and you wake up with the answer. Or you let your imagination play for a while, and you get a good response. My wife is able to do this at an articulate verbal level, but the rest of us, many of us, do it intuitively, and that includes you.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I'm definitely somebody who wants to learn more about how to do it. So you can trust that I'll be taking a look at the book in closer detail. One of the thoughts that comes to my mind is that you're describing all these interactions where there are people who are on the other side who are eager to communicate with us. And one can almost visualize them. They can't wait for the next bridge that God's building, so they can line up and cross that bridge to get to some of the people they're trying to get to.
Yes.
But the thought that also crosses my mind is: do these people are they regularly communicating with billions? Because there are 7 billion people on the planet. Are they selective about it? How do they make decisions like that?
Well, we have asked about that, and the answer seems to be that everybody is getting communications from heaven, but for most people it's subliminal, and through some interior thought process they are getting help, they're getting information, but it is frustrating to people on the other side that want a more explicit line of communication and a more direct line of communication. For example, Abraham Lincoln said, I'm trying to work with people in Congress now. I'm still interested in government, and I try to breathe consolation into the chambers of government and assist with policy understanding. Many of the people we talk to are trying to work on issues in American governance. That includes Oliver Wendell Holmes, who works with our judges. But it is somewhat frustrating to them that they can't make a more explicit connection, and they want to see more of that.
Interesting to hear the word frustration being associated with people on the other side.
Well, that's how they express it. They're thrilled when they make a very overt connection. They want more of that. What they describe now as a footpath between heaven and earth, they say they want it to be a broad bridge which many people can use. They want this to expand. They're eager to participate in our world because they see it as a platform for spiritual development. And the spiritual sages are very, very anxious to do that. That includes Buddha, Jesus, and Lao Tzu, Moses, and King David, Mary Baker Eddy. All the great spiritual teachers are trying to make connection and succeeding at a deeper level, but they want more and more of this.
How about people who aren't well known? I mean, everybody wants to channel somebody who's famous, but there are a lot of people who weren't famous who led very productive lives, who learned a lot. What happens there? Has there been any attempt to reach people like that?
Oh, absolutely. And, we were told explicitly that God values the street sweeper as much as the president, and that there are some very ordinary folks who are deeply spiritual and deeply loving in nature, and we asked God, what is the most exalted state that people can reach? And God said it's the deepest degree of love and compassion for others. So people you've never heard of are bright shining lights in heaven, and we have reached out to such people, including not only our own family, 30 or 40 members who are not famous individuals, but we also asked our guides, put us in touch with a very ancient man, for example, somebody who came to the United States 40,000 years ago, totally unknown. We reached an ancient shaman who came from Siberia and described how the settlers came to the United States 40,000 years ago. And the description is completely different from what anthropologists are speculating about now. But, he's a totally unknown person. He's not in history at all, but he was deeply spiritual and full of wonderful insights. And I asked, can we take this back further? I'm just curious. Can we go back to the time when when there was, very little difference between a chimpanzee and a human being, the first humans, the real Adam and Eve. And they said that would be difficult to do because you would regard these precursors as much like animals. But I said, I love animals and I'd like to talk. And we got through to a man who claimed to be about 2 million years old, and he described a world that was beyond belief. It was, a world in which these tiny mammals were being chased by the reptiles, and their lives were very, very short. But they had a small community, and they loved the fresh fruit and the sun on their back and the clear pools of water that existed in their world. And he had reincarnated a half dozen times since then. But again, this is a very humble story, but the man was filled with spiritual life and wonderful, loving impressions about the world. He called us his dear, dear family, and he conveyed a blessing for the whole modern world, which he found startling and incomprehensible, but wonderful.
Is it all Earth-centric, or are there other planets going through similar kinds of things?
Excellent question, and we did in our second book actually explore that. There's sentient life on many, many planets. It's very, very different from Earth. These carbon-based animals that live in a 70-degree temperature and breathe oxygen. Life on other planets is different, and it's at very different stages of evolution. Many of the people in heaven are travelers. That's a term used to describe those that go to these planets and help with the evolution and the development. Travelers came to this world, millions of years ago to help us develop. But yes, they're vastly different creatures. In the second book, we made connection with creatures in another part of the Milky Way, and they appeared to be diaphanous. They were almost like spirits, not with physical bodies of the kind that we know. And they were very benevolent, very intelligent, more advanced creatures, and they described themselves as helping our world. They travel through space themselves and are assisting the Earth in its development. There are also people in different dimensions, but they're not recognizable at all as human beings. But they do have brilliant, wonderful minds.
When you say other dimensions, what do you mean?
Well, beyond time, space. Totally outside of a physical universe. The physicists say there's about 11 dimensions, the string theorists, but in fact there are many more dimensions than that, where different kinds of consciousness develop. We spoke with a being that was in fact an assembly of many different minds. It was like sort of a society as opposed to an individual. And he said, when I see your world, I just see one mind. But that's an example of consciousness in a completely different dimension.
That's an interesting concept right there. When I see your world, I see one mind.
Yeah, that's what he reported, and he described the future as he saw it of his dimension. It's difficult to penetrate into the future. It's very easy to go back in time. You can go back, as I said, millions of years, but to go into the future requires a real effort, and we're told that the reason for that is that the future is really ineffable and hard to pin down because no one knows for sure the decisions that are going to be made. And God intends freedom for all people, so you're not dictated to by karma. You have a charter when you come into this world that sort of lays out the organization of your life, but that's not written in stone, and it can be varied during the course of your life. So when they talk to you, they don't really know. They can't look very far into your future. They can talk about your propensities. They can talk about what they would envision, but it's really largely a matter of projection.
So in some ways, the whole idea of trying to discover what God's plan is for me is in certain ways reaching for something that isn't there.
Well, it's something that is not static, and it's not written out, and it's changing. God made the point that I'm changing, I'm organic, I'm evolving, and it's a constant process of uplifting, and it's filled with surprises. And for you, Walt, you have freedom of choice, and you're going to call upon this psychic resource or that, or this intellectual resource or that, and move in a way that's under your control. You came into the world for a particular purpose. There's no question about that. It's obviously communications. But who knows? In your second career, you may become an author of books or a painter of paintings, or a singer in your choir. There's a lot of freedom.
The United States has the motto "E pluribus unum," out of many one. The whole concept of there being one mind, a species from many light years away looking at us and seeing just one mind, that's just kind of the opposite. Out of one mind, many.
That is a key creed in these readings. Heaven's emphasis is unity, unity, unity. Mankind is one. The creation is one. It is all embraced within God. God is one. This will be startling heresy, but the idea that God is one and not a trinity is something that all these readings confirm. That doesn't mean Jesus isn't a very exalted prophet and a very, very important man, a man filled with unique spiritual wisdom and unique spiritual power. But all of the people in heaven look to God as one and not divided. And there are Muslim friends, I think, have come upon a key truth. They say Allah is one, is not separated. This is a surprise to us as Christians that in heaven the idea of a Trinity is understood, but is not accepted literally. And unity is what they stress. Love and compassion for all of mankind. View the neighbor as yourself. Jesus' basic teaching: love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's the heart of the teaching. And when he said the kingdom of God is at hand, it's nigh and it's inside you. That means it's happened. I mean, you just have to step into the love of God and accept it. And at that point, your relationship with God is your heaven. You've made the connection. You're not something separate from or external to heaven. It's just a matter of you're opening up your heart and your mind to your real nature, your unity with God.
And yet at the same time, it sounds like out of this oneness is where all the manyness comes from, because we have all of these individuals who are pursuing their own paths, pursuing their own dreams and so forth. We're all many, we're all one. Both concepts happen at the same time, and they're actually not in contradiction with each other.
Absolutely. I mean, one thing that gets stressed again and again is despite the unity, or on top of the unity, each of us are individual expressions of God, individual. We're shining the wattage of God into different sectors of existence. We're working on different missions, all of which serve God's plan, all of which are developing and evolving. But yes, this individuality is key. And, on the back of the book, we have a little quote from the God interview. He says, write a book that everyone will understand. I want every man and woman to hear that they are uniquely beloved. My wish is to glorify each person's unique individuality. That is what God wants to do.
But that's a concept I don't want to leave, because that's a good one right there. I want to glorify each individual's, how'd you say it?
Unique individuality.
Unique individuality.
He says,
when was the last time we heard that from any religion?
God wants to reach out and pull every suffering heart into consciousness of its own beauty and glory, and to make all people understand how well beloved they are, cherished, treasured. I want to bring about this understanding and this acceptance.
And it's not about being earned.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, you are one with God, and God says in our second volume. Can you hear? Okay, John. Hello.
Hello.
Oh, our connection. Our connection. No.
Yeah. We got you just fine. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. God says that He wants to bring everyone into this unity with the rest of humanity, but with full recognition of their individuality and the special role that each has, and that they should stop wasting time and energy worrying about whether the blessing is deserved, whether they've offended the Creator by stepping over some line or violating one of 612 rules from scriptural writing.
So that's actually a waste of time.
That's what God says. It's stop wasting your time and energy on that, worrying about merit and desert and whether you've committed some sin, venial or worse. And Return to the love of God, return to the love of your fellow man, and that's where your focus should be. That's the productive emphasis.
My wife and I have both enjoyed doing these LOA Today radio shows because it is such a great way to communicate with people. But there are instances where I wish the video was involved, and this is one of them, because right now I'm grinning ear to ear, and I wish you could see that.
I'm glad to hear that. I regard this as sort of gospel-level information. It's wonderful news for a world that has been suffering, and living. The emphasis that we get is all the old teaching about shame and fear and guilt and punishment and anger, sinners in the hands of an angry God, and the need for suffering and sacrifice. All of that is a false emphasis. It isn't what Jesus intended to teach, and it isn't what the reality of God's attitude toward his creatures. He loves them all equally. Notwithstanding differences, they're all focused. They're at different levels. They're doing different activities, but they're all accepted and welcomed with open arms in heaven.
And in fact, at this point in time, does time actually apply? That's always a question that comes up. That time is here, it isn't there. Is time a concept over there?
It's really not. I mean, they are in a timeless realm, and
okay.
I asked, how do we misunderstand time here? And Richard Feynman, the scientist, said, well, it's like swimming through the ocean. You swim past an island and you think it's gone, like yesterday's news, but it's not. I mean, there's our sense of past, present, and future is totally gone in eternity. So it's an illusion that we have living in this little world that revolves around the sun with days of the week, but it's not a conception in heaven.
Yeah. Okay. So. Now that we have this new the new gospel, I like the way you said that. the gospel according to John. But we have this new gospel. The gospel basically says get rid of all the fear and the doubt and the punishment and all this other stuff because it's all a bunch of junk. What's it replaced with now? What is the message?
Well, the fun of these readings is there are three with God, and there are two with Jesus in the second book that's coming out. And the message is one of unconditional love, that God is a father and mother, that God is all nurturing, all encouraging, all forgiving, and also all inspiring. If you need help in the world, all of heaven is there to give you that assistance if you reach out. So it's just a wonderful, positive message, I believe, with the negative misconceptions stripped away. It really isn't a new gospel because, the people for thousands of years have believed in God and the prophets and Jesus and great teachers like Buddha and Lao Tzu and Moses. But the errors have been eliminated for those who credit these readings. And it turns out heaven is very anxious to relieve us of our misconceptions and to take, the whole world, Walt, is living in a state of mourning for people who've passed away. Your parents, your grandparents, aunts and uncles, your children, brothers and sisters, best friends. People mourn for years and years about this. It's terrible suffering, and it turns out to be based on a misconception. And people live in fear of their own death. They're afraid of sickness. They're afraid of suffering, and then the coffin that takes them away. What could be more terrible? Again, there's nothing to be nail biting about. It's what is in your future is totally positive. It's a promotion in every respect, and people in this world are divided. Right? The Christian guy doesn't agree with the Muslim guy. The Muslim guy doesn't agree with the Jewish guy, and they're all saying that person doesn't get into heaven. And we're going to fight to the death, to establish the truth in the world. And these are not our brothers because of theological, sectarian teaching. Turns out that's all wrong. And people that feel alone and isolated and lost because they're not educated and there's nowhere they can turn. In fact, they have a legion of friends that can educate them and fill them in on things that are important to them. They're not alone. So, that's what replaces it. It's just a much more benign and positive vision of this universe in which each person is invited to have a personalized relationship with the Creator. I think it's a step up.
And the coolest part about it is that last part, where the Creator actually wants to have an individual relationship with each one of us. And that, therefore, that's actually an invitation. It's an invitation to do the kind of thing that you and Martha did, which was to try to connect back, to try to reach out through psychic connection, through channeling, through whatever you want to call it, to kind of build your side of the bridge. And God builds most of the bridge, but we help build some of the bridge. I like that. That's a great concept.
I think it is. And remember, not everybody's going to hear just the way Martha does. I mean, the way I hear is intuition. Maybe that's the way you hear. There are people with more or less psychic ability. That's been true throughout the years. You know, St. Francis, St. Teresa, they could speak. Moses, they spoke directly with God. Jesus spoke directly with God. And ordinary people have done that too, but not everybody. Some get this in a more interior way at an intuitive level. But what God told us is no prayer is ever disregarded. They're all heard, and some help is provided, but not everything that you pray for is in your own self-interest. You know, you may pray for a new car or a new job when in fact the plan for you is to do something different, to learn in a different way. So your guides help you to the extent that it's consistent with, you know, your own welfare. But all these prayers are heard, and particularly if they're benevolent prayers, you know, blessings on others, not so much on yourself, but blessings on the world. Those are heard. And God said to us, you don't know the reach of your prayers. They reach sometimes 3 or 4 lives into the future for you, and they'll be answered then. But don't have any doubt that your prayers are heard, and they're answered in different ways.
And it all begins with meditation. Meditation is where the whole thing starts. It's how you begin to make your initial attempt at a connection, and regardless of whether you succeed in doing it the way Martha does it, where she gets reams of information, or whether you succeed in doing it just by getting little bits and pieces here and there, it's still a successful connection.
It is. You know, Lao Tzu, the philosopher, gave us quite a formula for how this should be approached, which we include in the book, in the introduction. But he makes the point that if you really want to go far in this, you have to increase your ability to listen, patiently listen. And you have to pray for divine wisdom, which we did. That's something King Solomon said is a legitimate thing to pray for. Maybe the only thing you can legitimately pray for is divine wisdom. So that's part of it. And, you know, thinking about metaphysical issues, reading in this area, prayer, reading the Bible, talking to other people that are interested in this, and working with others, taking an altruistic view. All of these things contribute to your ability to make this linkage. And again, there are people that do it better than others, and there are people that do it more overtly than I can do, such as Martha. But all can make progress, you know, by following a more spiritualized lifestyle.
Well, I'm going to conclude by tying in the concept of our show, which is about the law of attraction, of course. And with the law of attraction, what you've been teaching us today has reinforced for me where LOA is concerned, is that truly what we think is what we attract, because every thought is a connection to the other side. It's just a question of how well we're able to hear what's coming back.
You're absolutely right. And please bear in mind that there's this huge fund of love and intelligence and compassion on the other side of this very thin veil, which is getting thinner and thinner, and it's open to everybody. And they are very concerned in heaven about us. They want to help. They want to participate in our lives. So, you know, who would turn their back on this enormous resource of love and wisdom?
And for me, the whole concept of LOA is about achieving joy in every instant of my life and helping other people achieve joy in every instant of their lives. In essence, that's what removing the veil is. It's achieving ongoing joy.
Absolutely. Heaven is a huge fund of joy and love, and that's the theme that they emphasize, that we have to regain that. We have to move beyond shame, fear, guilt, punishment, last judgments, and so forth, and accept this fund of love and wisdom that waits for us.
All right. Sign me up. I'm ready. John McGinnis, it's been such a pleasure hearing all of the interesting insights you've achieved and received through your communications that you and Martha have successfully done. I forgot to ask you, what period of time did you do this over? I mean,
well,
how long did you do
we've done this now for 2 years. We're into our third book. The second one is coming out this summer. It's available on Amazon. Psychic Readings with the Thinkers of Heaven. And for folks that don't want to buy the book, just browse around in the preface, and they'll see how a little bit about how the process works.
Mm-hmm. And even if time is an illusion, at least it gives us some idea of, it doesn't take all that long to figure out how this thing works.
Well, that's right. I think there are benefits here for everybody, and some will go further than others.
That's very good. John McGinnis, thank you so much for joining us here on LOA Today. It's been a pleasure hearing from you. Oh, and before we lose you, where can people find out about you?
Check out our website. There's a description on Amazon.com that describes both of the authors.
Okay. Do you have a website yourself for the book?
Well, it's only on Amazon.
Only on Amazon. Okay. Well, then we'll look forward to perhaps at some point when you decide to have your own website, because that's what so many of the great spiritual thinkers do these days. You know that.
Well, please don't hesitate to get in touch, and we wish you well with the program.
That sounds great. Thank you again for joining us, John, and we'll have to have you back again sometime in the near future so that we can find out what the latest report is on people trying to do the same thing you and Martha have been doing.
Absolutely. I look forward to it.
We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.